Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Andrew Mushbaugh, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Trent DeBruin. And today we're going to talk through what you should check in on each year with your finances prior to retirement, since this review process changes once you actually make that transition. And in practice, this would be a lot to review all in one sitting, but to keep it simple, we'll discuss this as if it's a once-a-year financial checkup. And if our wives are still listening to the podcast, no, this still does not count as our annual financial plan review.
Yeah, I know they always appreciate those reminders.
Yeah, of course. Almost as much as our actual annual financial planning meetings.
Almost.
Well, now that we have that cleared up, we'll break down this into 6 different areas. Number 1, checking in to see if anything has changed over the year from a high level. Number 2, how cash flow feels on a monthly basis. Number 3, reviewing progress towards your goals. Number 4, looking at your current investment allocation relative to your target investment plan. Number 5, checking in on the recurring annual planning items like open enrollment and employer benefits, retirement contributions and tax planning, and other periodic planning items that come up like reviewing your estate plan or insurance needs. And finally, number 7 is the last area, which is setting up a plan for the coming year along with implementing any of the adjustments. So with that in mind, why don't you start off with that first step of the high-level initial check-in?
Sure. And this first step is often overlooked, as people might not always take the time to sit back and look at the big picture, which we're big proponents of seeing the forest before focusing on any of the individual trees. So we like to start here. And with that in mind, when you do this high-level check-in, it's really just about revisiting your overall financial and life situation to recognize if anything has changed. Have you been enjoying work on a day-to-day basis, or does retirement sooner than later seem increasingly attractive? Did one of your kids decide that they really want to go to a private college instead of an in-state school? Are there any renovations you'd like to make to your house, or would you maybe like to buy a new house? These are just a couple examples of the questions to ask, or at least review, to keep a fresh understanding of what you're working and saving toward when it comes to your finances. By doing this exercise, you give yourself an honest assessment of what's important to you and what, if anything, has changed over the past year. It's easy to think, I'll work until I'm 60, or I want to retire at 50, or I never want to retire at one point in your career, but that may change over time. For those of you who have an early retirement goal, it may be asking the question of what you'll do once you retire to fill your days. For some, this may be easy to answer, while for others, it may not be so easy. And for those who initially thought they would work till they're age 65, or perhaps they didn't have a set retirement date in mind, it might become increasingly clear as the years pass that you'd like to scale back or stop work entirely before then. Looking at some of the other questions we mentioned, like the college goal, and if your child who initially wanted to go to an in-state school now wants to go to a private school that costs 3 times as much, well, you could start by taking some time for your blood pressure to come back down, and then you can think about how important this is to you. You may decide that you want to fully pay for any school your child wants to attend, regardless of the financial implications, or you may want to understand how that would impact your other goals before making a decision one way or the other. There's no right or wrong answer here, and these decisions are personal to you and your family in terms of what you value and what's most important to you. The reason revisiting and reflecting on the big picture is the starting point in the annual financial plan review is that it allows you to get clear on what your ideal scenario would be if money wasn't an issue. And from there, which we'll touch on later, you can then see whether that ideal scenario is doable or if you need to make adjustments to any of your goals. Either way, you'll have an aiming point or understanding of the forest before you dive into the trees or the day-to-day details of managing your finances.
Yeah, and we don't want this to feel like people are listening to a bad Tony Robbins podcast here, but it's really important to at least have an understanding of what's most important to you and what your priorities are so you can make better informed decisions of how to manage your finances. And this leads us to the second area, which is more focused on the day-to-day, and that's looking at your cash flow and how it feels each month. When we refer to cash flow, it's simply looking at the paychecks you have coming in biweekly or monthly relative to what you are saving and spending. The reason we go through cash flow second is because of how important we feel it is to strike the right balance of saving enough for the future, but also enjoying things along the way. The goal here is to minimize the amount of stress finances causes you, and one of the biggest stressors is feeling tight or stretched on a monthly basis of meeting your day-to-day living expenses. Regardless of the cause, whether it is from overspending, saving more than you may need to, or just a one-off expensive month or year of expenses, no one enjoys the feeling of having to frequently check the bank account or credit card balance. So when reviewing your cash flow, we like to start with the high-level question of how's cash flow feeling on a month-to-month basis. And this serves as another piece of information that can help you come up with an overall plan. There's often a wide range of answers to this question. It could be, I think it's fine, my bank account's staying about the same, or I don't think about it, but my bank account balance, where my paycheck goes, continues to grow. Or it could say it feels tight and I'm eating ramen noodles and have to use my fireplace for heat. But depending on how you answer the question here will help you make a decision on if there are any adjustments you need to make of working toward that goal of being in a spot where you feel comfortable on a month-to-month basis with how your cash flow is feeling. However, like I mentioned, this is just one additional piece of information. Before you make any decisions of either trying to save more or spend less, depending on how cash flow feels, it's helpful to zoom back out and have context around the current path you're on relative to the goals that you reviewed in step 1.
Exactly. Without that context, it'd be tough to have an idea of whether you'd be sacrificing too much today by making any adjustments or potentially jeopardizing your options in the future, which is where step 3 comes into play of reviewing your progress toward your goals. So keeping with that theme of balancing enjoying today or doing what you want to do and not feeling stressed with cash flow month to month with saving enough for the future, this part is about that second half of that equation. And this is something you want to check in on each year for a variety of reasons, but 2 of the biggest are, 1, a lot can happen in a year in terms of how your preferences and feeling toward goals change, like suddenly wanting to retire early or finding out your kid was accepted to their dream school. And 2, your investments and savings will fluctuate over time, so you want to understand if you need to make any adjustments as a result. In this step, you want to revisit and quantify the various goals you have. If, when you did that initial check-in in step 1, you decide that you would now like to be able to retire at 55 instead of 60, you'll want to see where you stand relative to that being a possibility. By checking in on your retirement projections, you may realize that based on the investments you've accumulated up to this point, along with the current amount you're saving toward retirement each year, retiring at 55 and living your ideal retirement lifestyle simply isn't doable based on your current trajectory. And if that's the case, you can look at your options. For example, you could look at how much extra you need to save each year to get there, or what the picture would look like if you reduced how much you plan to spend in retirement, or even some combination of retiring a little later, spending a little less, and saving a little more. The purpose of running these financial projections is to give you context and a better understanding of your options and the associated trade-offs, so you can then make an intentional decision about which adjustments you're comfortable with. And while that's just looking at retirement, you'll follow a similar process for any other goals you have, like saving for college or saving for a vacation home. You look at where you are today, what you're currently saving toward the specific goal, and whether or not you're on track to be able to reach that goal in the future. After going through this exercise, you'll understand what, if any, adjustments you'd need to make to your current lifestyle and savings to meet those goals. From there, assuming some adjustments are required, you'll want to prioritize what's most important to you. And at this point, you can go back to step 2 of looking at your cash flow to see if the required changes will still strike the right balance for you. For example, if retiring at 55 is the most important goal for you, and you aren't on track based on your current savings, you'll almost certainly need to increase the amount you're saving each month, which in reality, there are really only 2 ways to do this. Either make more money or lower your spending. On the other hand, if fully paying for an expensive private school is more important than retiring at 55, and you aren't currently on track to do this based on running the college projections, you'll be able to understand how much extra you would need to put toward college savings. That could mean less toward retirement, which may or may not impact when you can retire, or potentially cutting back on other areas of your spending today. As you can see, with managing your finances, all these different parts are connected and there are trade-offs involved since there's only so much money to go around and not everyone can afford to meet their ideal vision as laid out in step 1. But after completing the step number 3 and checking in on your progress toward your various goals, regardless of whether or not you're happy with the result, you'll at least have a sense of control by knowing you've prioritized what's most important to you and are comfortable and intentional with the trade-offs you have to make. Which this is a lot better than blindly thinking you're either behind your goals or on track toward your goals, which can come at the expense of either oversaving or potentially overspending and being in for an unwelcome surprise in the future.
Yeah, it's definitely a big goal for us, which is to help avoid those surprises. And it's more enjoyable getting to share the good news that people are ahead of their goals and can spend a little more or retire earlier, at least than the other way around.
Yeah, although it's a lot harder than you might think it is for us to get clients to spend more.
Yeah, it's true. And you did touch on this of why you need to review the progress towards your goals, but a big component of the changes that happen within a year are around the movement in people's investments portfolio. And especially since we know that not every year will be as tame as 2020 with the casual 35% stock market decline and subsequent 80% run up. But joking aside, this is another important area to periodically review to make sure that your investments are still aligned based on your goals. And taking a step back, when you initially decide on an investment allocation, ideally you set an intentional allocation that was based on the time horizon for the goal you are saving for. We call this your target investment allocation. So it could look like having 60% in a US investment fund, 25% in an international fund, and 15% in emerging market funds, or whatever allocation you're comfortable with that is right for you. Well, you may set that initial target on day 1, but over time, those different investments will perform differently. And eventually, they may drift too much away from your initial target. So what you want to periodically do is rebalance your portfolio, which consists of selling whatever has done the best and buying more of whatever has relatively underperformed to bring you back to your target. Effectively, what you are doing in a disciplined way is selling high and buying low. Now, everyone is different in terms of their comfort level with how far they want to let their investments drift before rebalancing. In some sense, it's a lot like getting a haircut, where some people might want to do it every 3 weeks, while others may wait 6 months. And we discussed rebalancing in more detail on episode 19, which was about the other 20% of investing. But to summarize that conversation, the ideal way to rebalance is by using target investment bands, which essentially act as rules that you follow, and then looking for those rebalancing opportunities every 2 weeks. Now, it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to trade every 2 weeks, but by having those rules in place of when you rebalance and checking in twice a month, you're able to capture a little better return over time. So while that's the optimal approach to rebalance, we know not everyone is as interested or has the time to follow this approach, and we're proponents of at least focusing on getting the big things right first. With that in mind, when you do your annual checkup, you want to compare your current investment mix relative to your target investment mix to decide if you need to make any changes. The other reason to check in each year with your investments is to decide if that investment mix is still right for you. And this will change over time, as the way you invest for retirement at 35 will be different than how you should invest at 60. So checking in each year allows you to remain comfortable with your investment mix and make adjustments over time to ensure that your investment allocation remains invested based on your goals.
Yeah, and while people tend to focus more on the investments and the changes they have to make or think they have to make there over time, it's common to overlook the other financial planning areas and reviewing them each year to take advantage of any opportunities. And some of these other planning areas I'm referring to include things like reviewing your employer benefit options, how much you're contributing to your retirement accounts, year-end tax planning opportunities, and any relevant opportunities or changes required as a result of new legislation or changes to tax policy, which we've seen a lot of over the past several years. So while this is a much wider net in terms of what all you should be or could be reviewing each year, there are several things you'll want to check in on annually, so I'll at least point out a few of the most common items. And the first one is around retirement contributions. So the IRS periodically increases the maximum amount you can contribute to retirement accounts like IRAs, Roth IRAs, 403bs, 457bs, and 401ks. So you want to keep up on any changes to make sure you're continuing to optimize the way you're saving to these accounts. For example, a few years ago, the maximum contribution to a 403b or 401k was $18,000 per year if you were under age 50, whereas today that number is $19,500. So for a Michigan physician couple that didn't adjust their contributions, on a combined basis, they'd be missing out on the opportunity to save an extra $3,000 annually to these retirement accounts, which would mean around $1,000 a year in missed tax savings between state and federal taxes that they could have easily captured. So this is something you'll want to revisit each year to make sure you're continuing to take advantage of the maximum amount you can contribute to your tax-advantaged retirement accounts. The second area, which is similar to retirement contributions, is reviewing your employer benefits. Each year during open enrollment in the fall, you have the option to adjust your benefits, including your health insurance plan. So if you know your situation might change over the coming year, you can plan ahead. For example, if you're younger and healthier, it might make sense to pay less in premiums and have a plan with a higher deductible. On the other hand, if you're having a baby in the following year or know there are other larger healthcare costs you'll be incurring, it might make sense to pay more in premiums for a plan with a lower deductible and lower out-of-pocket costs. Outside of health insurance, your employer might also give you the option to contribute to tax-advantaged accounts like a health savings account or a flexible spending account, either for healthcare or dependent care. And these are accounts that you can use to receive tax deductions for expenses you're already incurring. And we won't go into the details here, but there are pluses and minuses to each account, and they may not make sense for everyone depending on your situation, but open enrollment provides a great opportunity to reevaluate whether a health savings account or flexible spending account makes sense for you, especially as another opportunity to save on taxes. And on the topic of taxes, the third financial planning area you'll want to revisit each year is around tax planning. This is something that changes over time, but each year you'll want to review whether there are any additional tax planning opportunities available to you and whether you should be doing any proactive tax planning, especially if you're in a transition period, like finishing training and starting your first attending position, or at the other end of the spectrum if you're nearing retirement. The other aspect of taxes is looking at your tax refund or what you owed with your last tax return. If there's a big discrepancy here, you may want to consider making adjustments like changing your tax withholdings from your paychecks or making quarterly estimated payments to avoid any surprises in the following tax year. So those are just a few examples of areas you'll want to revisit each year, but there are also other areas you'll want to periodically check in on. These include reviewing how much life and disability insurance you have relative to your need, looking at your estate plan to see if you need to make any changes, and checking in on your home and auto insurance to make sure you have adequate coverage and aren't overpaying. As an example, looking at life insurance, if you purchased $1 million of life insurance when it was just you and your spouse, that may have been sufficient at the time, but if you now have 3 kids, you may want to revisit if that's still enough. And on the flip side, if you're nearing retirement and the kids are grown and out of the house, you may not need as much or possibly any life insurance, and you could consider canceling policies or reducing the amount of coverage you have to save money on premiums each year. And one last point when it comes to things to periodically review over time is keeping informed on how changing legislation impacts your situation and any associated planning you might want to do as a result of it. Over the past several years, there have been significant changes to tax laws, estate laws, and other financial planning items you can take advantage of if you're aware of the opportunities. Just to give a quick example, one of the changes from the Secure Act of 2018 is that people are now allowed to take $10,000 out of a 529 plan to pay back student loans. While this may not seem like a big deal on the surface, if you have student loans, you can save $425 in taxes in Michigan by making a $10,000 contribution to a 529 plan for yourself and then reimbursing yourself in the following calendar year to pay back the loans. So by taking advantage of the change, you can effectively use the 529 account as a conduit to save money in taxes while making student loan payments you'd be making anyway. So as you can see with all these different areas to review each year, there isn't a single silver bullet, but by incrementally reviewing all the different planning items and taking advantage of the opportunities as they come along, it can really add up over time, not only in terms of saving you money, but also making sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed when it comes to your overall financial life.
Exactly. People aren't always aware of how much these different areas can accumulate over time. And the last area we'll touch on is around actually implementing on the areas that we discussed and setting a plan. Since this is a lot to digest all at once, and you likely can't take care of everything all at once, it's helpful to at least list out everything you want or need to address over the coming year. This could include things like buying $1 million of term life insurance, getting an estate plan, updating my health insurance plan, increasing my monthly savings to your 529 plan, etc. The goal is to get everything listed down on paper so you can then break it down on how you want to address and implement those items throughout the year. By doing this, it helps you stay organized and also makes the process more manageable of methodically working through your list over time. And on that note, at least when it comes to saving, it's best to try and automate things whenever you can. Similar to your 403b or 401k, where you have a set amount come out of your paycheck before it hits your bank account, this can be helpful for any other goal that you're saving for. Typically, we found it to be most manageable by setting a recurring monthly savings target and adjusting over time, whether that's saving a little more each month if you have extra cash flow, or potentially scaling back if things feel too tight. With this last step, and similar to New Year's resolutions, we would recommend setting reasonable targets and timelines for checking off the various items, because this will help you avoid being overwhelmed and then not making any progress on the items because the list of items feels like too much. Well, hopefully that was a helpful discussion on a process you can follow as you look through to review your finances each year. And I know we say this a lot, but when you do this review and check in, make sure it's focused on you and what's most important to you without worrying about if it aligns with what your neighbor or colleague is doing. While there are general rules of thumb out there, everyone has different values, goals, and unique circumstances, which means everyone will have a different plan that works for them. So to give a quick recap of the 6-step process for your annual financial review, you want to first start by checking in to see if anything has changed over the year from a high level around your goals. Number 2, have an understanding of how cash flow feels on a monthly basis. Number 3, review where you stand relative to your goals and then understand any adjustments you have to make so you can be comfortable with the trade-offs. Number 4, look at your current investment allocation relative to your target investment plan and rebalance your portfolio back to target. Number 5, be sure to check in on any recurring annual planning items like your employer benefits and retirement contributions, along with any other periodic planning items that come up like reviewing your estate plan or insurance needs. And finally, the last area is setting the plan for the upcoming year, along with how you'll implement any of the adjustments or changes over time. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of the show. If you want to check out the show notes, you can find them at mdwmllc.com/podcast. And as always, you're welcome to email us at info@mdwmllc.com if you have any thoughts or questions to share. Take care, everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.